You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Monday evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my show. I'm Scotty Roberts. This is the Intrepid radio program right here on Odyssey Radio Network. That's Odyssey1.com, Odysy 1.com. And you can also see the simulcast in video over on my YouTube stream. And that is, of course, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Mr. all spelled out, Scotty with a Y. Mr. Scotty Roberts. So welcome. I hope you had a great weekend. I did. I spent half of it painting, which is some of what I do. I want to say, I don't know which is on the side. The thing that earns me money is my art. Art, design, illustration, writing, all of that stuff. And I had a buddy of mine who I've painted murals with in the past called me up at the last minute and said, can you come out on Sunday and help me for the day finish a mural? And it was kind of wall texturing was what we were doing. It's more, there's a word for it, a French word, trompe-l'oeil, which is trying to make something look like something real. It would be as if you walk into somebody's house and see a blank wall, but painted on that is pillars and things like that are all over the place, and you're trying to make the wall look like something different than what it is. And so we were working on a small room, which was hot and humid, and no airflow in there, but trying to make the lower half of the wall of a library room look like it was leather panels, so rough leather that's, like upholstered around panels. And this was in a small library room of a Masonic lodge, and where I seem to do a lot of mural painting in Masonic lodges in my career. But so this was a small one. So I spent most of my day Sunday doing that. So I'm still covered with paint that doesn't come off yet. It'll wear off in a day or so with repeated washings. So that's what I did. I hope your weekend was fun. This week, as a matter of fact, I want to bring this up. Rocky Stucci and I, on Thursday of this week, we're going to go spend the afternoon down at Fort Snelling, which is here in, I always say it's Minneapolis because it's right by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, but it's on the river, on the Mississippi there, and the channels that run around it. It's a fort that's been there for a couple of hundred years. It's technically in St. Paul, but it seems to me to be on the right side of the Mississippi River to be Minneapolis, so it's right there in the mix. And we're going to go down there, and if you remember my series a couple of weeks ago where I was talking about Wounded Knee and some Native American issues, and I made mention, and I've mentioned it before, the concentration camp in the 1860s that was at the base of the fort. Now, the fort sits up on a big bluff overlooking the river, but down below are the river flats, and it's all wooded right now, and they've got paths, bike paths, walking paths going through there. But in the the years 1862 and 63, they had a Dakota Native American concentration camp there beneath the fort. And this was right after the Dakota Wars in southern Minnesota. And there were at least 1,200 Native American men, women, and children interred there. And the winter of 1862, the harsh winters, and the deprivation, starvation, the temperatures, which up here in the winter times, I don't know what the temps were back in 1862, but over the winter it can sometimes drop to actual air temperature of 20 to 30 degrees below zero, mixed with your snow and ice and your wind chills. We've had, I know, just last winter, we had a couple of days where with the combined wind chill and air temperature, we got to 70 below zero was what the air felt like. Now, lest you get in your mind we live in a frozen tundra up here year-round, that's not so. It can get just as hot on the opposite end of the spectrum up here in Minnesota, Wisconsin. We had over 100 degrees and really high dew points and humidities in the summertime, almost subtropical. Matter of fact, if it stayed that way year-round, we'd have vegetation like you see down in Florida, and probably have alligators and snakes and scorpions and all those things. The winter kills all that stuff off for us up here, so we're lucky in that respect. And the good thing is that harshness of winter generally only lasts for a short period of time in the thick of the winter. You're talking January. You can have a couple of weeks of really harshly cold weather, and then it starts thawing out in February, and you get a couple of blizzards and blah, blah. There's the weather. We'll get that out of the way. But at this concentration camp, 300 men, women, and children died of deprivation, of starvation, of the weather, the elements, that winter of 1862. And now there is a marker there that's been put up just in recent years, a memorial by, I don't remember who sponsored it, but it's a Dakota memorial, and it's built out of logs and at odd angles and things around a stone-built circle, but there's no signage there. There's nothing that really commemorates it. Maybe in the visitors center you can read more about it. It was closed when I was there with my family last week. But Rocky and I are going to go down there. I'm curious about what your opinions are on this. We're going to go, as you know, Rocky Stucci. I do the Situation Room with him. That's his show on here on Odyssey and on Mojo 50 and on his YouTube channel. It starts 2 hours after this show starts every night of the week, other than Saturday and Sunday. And we're going to go down because we have done paranormal investigation in the past. And while I have said before, paranormal investigation, are we really investigating to know something? Are we thrill-seeking, which I know a lot of people do and a lot of groups will do? Are we looking to find out information? For me, there is always a thrill element to it. If you get something from that unknown side of things and it speaks to you, I mean literally, audibly, you hear it in recordings, you see it on film, and I've captured a lot of this stuff. There's also those who, and I don't consider myself to be psychic in any way, but we all have some sort of intuitive abilities. You expose yourself to this stuff long enough, you get the emotion of that stuff will sink into you, and you'll be susceptible to it more than if you're just going out and checking out a place. So the more you do it, the more it becomes part of who you are. And the more you are susceptible, if that's a good word for it, susceptible to the energies that are there, and you can feel certain things. It's not just psychological trickery. I have a lot of skeptical friends that will say, oh, that's nothing. It's you just want to see a ghost or you just want to experience something, so you will. And I say, no, it's much more than that. I don't need to see, I'm going to say this for the record, folks, I've said it before, I don't need to see a ghost bad enough to manifest it out of my imagination. That's bullshit as far as I'm concerned. I'm looking for the real thing. I'm looking to see if something is actually going to contact me or connect with me or speak to me. And it's happened many, many times. And if you've listened to this show long enough, and Rocky's show and my show long enough, then you'll know that we've experienced these kinds of things and strange happenings. That we aren't rubes that just fell off the turnip truck last week. When we experience weird things or strange things, we go through the whole gamut of seeing what we can do to find if there's any other natural explanation for what we've experienced. Many times when you get a voice that's captured on a recorder, and there's nobody else there, there's nothing that could pick up that sound from anywhere else and make it as vibrant and clear as being in the same room with you. You don't hear it audibly when you're there, but you listen back to the recording and it's there. Some skeptics will say, well, maybe that's something that was on the tape before, maybe it's picking up something. You know what? I don't buy any of those. Those are legitimate questions to ask, but when you get direct responses to questions that you ask and it's immediate, that coincidence is way too high to be coincidence. So here's what Rocky and I plan to do this Thursday, which is what started that little rabbit trail. We're going to go back down to Fort Snelling this Thursday during the day, and we're going to go down to that wooded area, those river flats down below. And we're going to walk around. We're going to get a feel for the place. You can't really even see where this concentration camp used to be. It's all fully wooded now. You've had 140 years plus of natural growth in that area down below the fort. It's not part of the fort per se, like their parade grounds or anything. This was in an area that was cleared specifically to put a concentration camp, and it's down on the river flats in one of the narrow channels off the river. And it's right across from Pike's Island, which, according to Native American lore, Pike's Island right there on the site, which is just a little footbridge across one of the channels of the Mississippi. So it's a very short distance. That island is supposed to be the birthplace of humanity. And and that's all just a wooded island. And all that's there now are rough paths that are all around. You can bike down there. You can walk your dog. You can go on hiking tours around. And there's a few signs. One thing I noticed that was greatly lacking was any sign that really said that what you're standing on in this site was a concentration camp of Native Americans where so many people lost their lives. There is on one of the big, you've seen them, like state park placards. It's got a picture of a photograph that was taken of that site when it was a concentration camp back in the 1860s, and it mentions the concentration camp, but it goes on to other things. It doesn't mention much else. And if you bear with me for just a moment here, I am going to show you. I know we showed this on Rocky's show, the concentration camp at Fort Snelling, Native American. I'm going to grab a picture, and I didn't do this ahead of the show, so I don't have it available other than right now going to dig it up. And those of you, of course, who are listening, you're not going to be able to see this, but you can come over to my channel and take a look at this at a later date. I see several pictures of it here. I'm going to find probably what I think is one of the better pictures of it. It might be a little low res, so don't let that make you nervous. Let's see if we can actually save this. And I'm going to save. I'm going to save the image right here and bring it up for you. This is a picture that was taken back in the day, 1860s, of this concentration camp. And so give me just a moment while I'm fumbling with my buttons here, and we'll get this put up for you to see. Now, this was post-Dakota Wars. There were what they dubbed the Dakota Wars after they happened in the late 1850s, 1860s. And a lot of these people were rounded up, and they were put into this concentration camp at Fort Snelling. And from this camp, by the way, they were going to attempt to execute all the males because they considered them all part of the warriors that were fighting and killing white settlers in southern Minnesota. And Lincoln, Abe Lincoln, who was president at the time, he said, no, we're not going to do that. He says, what I want us to do is choose 38 men. I'm not sure why they came down to 38. But here, this is the image. I'm pulling it in now. Let me make it big enough for you to see. All right here, you can see this image. This is the concentration camp that is down on the river flats below the fort. Now, this is all wooded right now. You see one of the old buildings in the lower left of the picture. That's one of the buildings at the fort. And this is the big wall they put around the Native American concentration camp. And you can see the channel of the river is out there, just beyond the fort in the background. And there's a small footbridge you can cross to go over to what you see as Pike's Island back there. And so this is the concentration camp site. It's down below the fort. I'm going to try to find the exact spot because the whole place is wooded right now. But this is where they had housed all these men, women, and children, and where so many of them died from exposure and starvation. So this is where Rocky and I are going to go later this week on Thursday. And here's where I need... Your opinion is probably not going to change what we're going to do, but I want to get your take on this. What do you feel about going to a site like this? It's unmarked, but doing a little recording, doing a little investigation work. And I'm talking investigation work light. We're going to go down with a recorder, with a spirit box, things like that, for the sole purpose of seeing, can we get somebody who was once there that would speak to us from the spirit realm? Now, by the way, I got to tell you, I'm not skeptical of this stuff. I've experienced far too much of it. And most of you know me by now. I'm fairly common-sensed. I'm fairly pragmatic. I have always said if I can't see it, touch it, taste it, handle it, talk to it, hear it audibly, it's tough for me to believe in it. But these things I have experienced many, many times over the last 25 years. And so we're going to go down there. What's your opinion of doing something like this on a site like this? It's not set aside as a sacred site. It's been all overgrown and there's bike paths all around it. What if Rocky and I went trundling into the woods and did a little spirit box session? Did a little recording to see if anybody would speak to us from that perspective. I have to think with the emotional draw, the empathic draw that we both seem to have to this right now, we're going to end up with something. We may do a little live broadcasting from there on Thursday, so watch for that. We'll let you know as we get closer to it. But this is what we plan to do. What's your thoughts? I know a lot of paranormal investigators will take their equipment, they'll go out to cemeteries and graveyards and do recording and stuff like that. Do you think this is disrespectful to the dead? In a situation like this that is so sensitive with the Native American site, this should be holy ground. Do you think it's disrespectful? I don't. That's my opinion. What's your opinion? Now, I would think it would be disrespectful if we treated it disrespectfully, and I think there are ways to do that. You bring in a whole television crew and you set up cameras all over and you have a commissary there and you have people running around. That's disrespectful to me. If you go with a respectful attitude, what do you think about that? I'll report in on this because we'll do more of this, talk about this week as it comes up, and of course as we're there on Thursday. So I'm going to give you another quick look at that camp. This is the original camp, taken from the fort, looking down onto the river flats. And there is now, off to the right somewhere, modern day, there is a big visitors center that's down there. It was closed when we were there because there had been some flooding down here from the heavy rains. And so they closed the road off to go down there, and there was flooding in the visitors center. So I don't know what they say about this camp at the visitors center. I know in the past we were going to do some filming at Fort Snelling. We had the permission of the Minnesota Historical Society. And the day before we went down with a crew from one of the channels, the stations up here. By the way, we weren't going down to the concentration campsite. We were just going to go into the fort itself and do a paranormal investigation. We had the kibosh put on us by the new person that was in charge after we had lined it all up and we had to find a different location. They said they did not want us publicizing this problem at the fort because of the Native American community. And so while we're not making this a big deal now, we're not going to televise it, just Rocky and me going down to this site. I think it'll be very interesting to see what we get, if anything. And with all the draw that I get, let's call it intuitively, perhaps psychically, all the draw that brings me to these topics and brings us back to this place, I've got to think somebody there is eager to speak to us, and I'm talking spiritually. So we'll see how that all goes, and we'll see what happens. But folks, we are at the end of this first segment, believe it or not. So I'm not going to say any more about that. Let's go out to break. I'm going to be gone for 2 minutes, and I'll be right back. You sit tight. All right, folks, welcome back from that break. Thanks for sitting and waiting and for coming back. We appreciate you being here. I appreciate you being here. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with me, your host, Scotty Roberts, and it's right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's Odyssey 1, ODYSY 1.com. You can go there and hear the audio. You can also find links to the radio stations we're broadcast on, the iTunes, iHeart, Spreaker, and all those other places where this airs. That's for the audio only. If you'd like to see the video version of this, the simulcast, come on over to my live video stream over on my YouTube channel, which is Mr. Scotty Roberts. And when you call it up, there's a banner that says Adventure Town Communique. That's what I wanted to call the site, and of course I had already named it after myself, Mr. Scotty Roberts, when I first started the site. So Adventure Town Communique is not in the actual link, but it is the title of the site. So come on over, take a look, and while you're there, the benefit of being there is you can, even if you want to listen to the audio over on Odyssey, you can join the live chat room in the live simulcast. I can't guarantee they will always sync up just right, because there's different ad breaks and things like that over on Odyssey. But come on over and take a look. And you can see some of the pictures if you do that we put up. That's one of the fun things about doing this on a live video. So welcome back. I'm going to switch topics dramatically right now. Whole first segment, we were talking about Fort Snelling and about the concentration camp there, and that Rocky and I are going to go down there this Thursday and do some live recording down there at the old concentration camp site, and do kind of a paranormal, if you will, investigation. I almost hate to call it that because I think the word paranormal has become a caricature of itself due to the community and due to all the stuff wrapped around it. So it is investigation of a spiritual nature. So you can join us for that. But I was reading some articles, and I want to get into a little Star Trek lore here. No, let me amend that. It's not lore. It involves some of Star Trek lore, but it involves the character, the psychology in Star Trek. And I think that this is a pretty cool thing when you think about it. And I've got an article that is not my article that is called up here, and I'm going to make some reference to this article, but I'll, of course, make my own comments on it. It's an article called The Psychology of Spock, Past, Present, and Future. And it's on The Brain Knows Better, I think is the website. And I found this very interesting, and it was what somebody had written about Spock and the character and the psychology of this character after seeing some of the J.J. Abrams movies, seeing some of the reworks. Did you know that Spock is the only character in all of Trek lore that has made it into every incarnation of that timeline shown in the movies or TV series? And so It's interesting. This is something he wrote in after the movie came out, Into Darkness, the second J.J. Abrams movie. And there was a psychologist, friend of the writer, who says Spock is the most important character in the Star Trek universe. And he's wielded more influence than anyone else. And what do you think about that when you think of Spock? If you're into Star Trek, and I hope you are, certainly if you're listening to Odyssey Radio, you're into Star Trek, Star Wars, science fiction, and things of that nature. I know Russ is the head of the Federation, and that absorbs a lot of space here on Odyssey. And so why is Spock such an enduring character? What do you think? I know Kirk was my favorite character. I identified with Kirk. I didn't identify with Spock. I identified with Kirk because he was this self-made man, a man who was a man despite the things that happened to him. He was a man who stood alone. He had his own psychological makeup, at least in the fictional realm, the psychological makeup of this character. And I found affinity with Kirk, the kind of man that he was, the kind of commander he was. But there are many who will say Spock was their favorite character. And trying to understand Spock is a very interesting... It's not, let's put it this way. This is not necessary to cleaning the environment. This is not necessary to the diversity of humanity. This is not necessary to electing the next president or making sure the Second Amendment is safe. Take any issue you want. Who Spock is and the psychology of Spock falls well under in importance. But it's very important on the level of literature or literary experience for humanity. Even though it was a television show, it's all written. I call this visual literature. And the character of Spock is important in, you could say, in that geek realm or the nerd realm, but he is also important to literature. He's important to understanding that why people created a character like this and the things that actors and different actors brought to the character. Because you've got, who have you got who's played Spock so far? Yeah, Leonard Nimoy, of course, who created the role. And trying to top that role by anybody is tough. Zachary Quinto, who played Spock, the younger Spock, in the J.J. Abrams movies, did a fantastic job. He was handpicked by Leonard Nimoy, or at least hand-approved, you could say. Leonard Nimoy found him to be spot on to play Spock. You've also got, I can't remember his first name off the top of my head, Gregory Peck, the famous screen actor. His grandson, Peck, and the same last name, plays Spock in the Discovery series. And looks a little too... He's got the basic overall look for me. He looked great when the character had the shaggy hair and the beard as he was on the run. I don't want to... this is in the very young days of Spock when he was working with Captain Pike in the series story arc. But he looked good with the longer hair and the shaggy and the beard. When they cleaned him up with the haircut and all of that and put him in uniform, he tended to look a little young to me, maybe a little boyish. And he lost me a little bit, but he played the part very well. So Leonard Nimoy, Zachary Quinto, Peck have played him. Spock teaches us that the things that make us different, strange, and weird from the rest of the group are the same things that make us incredibly awesome. So if you are a standout, this is something that I think a lot of people drew from Spock, was that he was genius beyond genius intelligence. His mind was incredible, as the race that he played, Vulcan. But he was different amongst humans. He would be like the one white guy going to a black Baptist church, kind of feeling. You're there, you're experiencing with everybody else, but you're a little different than the rest of the crowd, or vice versa. Change that around. That's just a quick example off the top of my head. Spock's very different than that example. And this is the psychology of Spock. Who we are in life is the result of our biology, our psychology, all of our experiences combined. So let's begin this whole conceptualization of Spock from exploring his unique biology. He's half human and half Vulcan. While we can't begin to imagine how the biology of an interspecies human would work, we can extrapolate based on what we've seen in Star Trek and know about science of the day. I know when I spoke about Native American issues a couple of weeks ago, you had your quote-unquote half-breeds that were living 1 foot in one world and 1 foot in the other world. And that was a very difficult existence for some of them. Now, this is a fictional science fiction character on top of it. So let's take a look at this. Spock is genetically diverse. It made him more adaptive to new environments, less susceptible to genetic diseases, like his father's dementia, as if you followed the Star Trek lore. And since Vulcans evolved into a harsher in a harsher environment, Spock is stronger than most humans physically. Vulcans are touch telepaths. They could touch you. My mind to your mind, my thoughts to your thoughts. And we saw an expansion of that in the Discovery series, which some people didn't like, where there wasn't even touch. There was like interstellar mental connection that they added to the lore. But when we're looking at Spock, the way he was created, he had the ability to share thoughts through mind melding. Vulcans experience powerful emotions, making Spock more vulnerable to very intense feelings. So what Vulcans did, they weren't, when I was a kid and I first watched the series, I didn't quite understand all that. I thought their species was emotionless. They're not. They have suppressed their emotions, which are indeed very strong. And the last point is key to understanding Spock's psychology. Here's how Spock's father describes Vulcan emotions in 2009's Star Trek, which was J.J. Abrams' movie. He said, "Emotions run deep within our race. In many ways, more deeply than in humans. Logic offers a serenity humans seldom experience, the control of feelings so that they do not control you." Now, I know that a lot of people, I do this myself sometimes. I'm a very emotional person. Sometimes you have to put the stops on the emotion in order to accomplish something more logical, to coin Spock's word. And since Spock has a nervous system that experiences powerful emotions, a very fast limbic system we learned in the series, he can make decisions very quickly. What about his human biology? And here's a conversation from Star Trek Enterprise that helps us understand the difference between humans and Vulcans. Soval, the character in Enterprise, said, "We don't know what to do about humans. Of all the species we've made contact with, yours is the only one we can't define. You have the arrogance of the Andorians, the stubborn pride of Tellarites. One moment you're as driven by your emotions as Klingons, and the next you confound us by suddenly embracing logic." And the character Forrest said, I'm sure those qualities are found in every species. Soval said, "Not in such confusing abundance." So remember, this is all in this fictional setting. And so this is a look at what humans are. And maybe this describes who we are, our human condition. We are all of those things. We can be vastly, ragingly emotional. And in the next step, we can be incredibly logical. And so it's very interesting the way the human brain works. Humans are flexible in our thinking, which explains why we can be so erratic and so unpredictable. Ever been in a relationship? Erratic and unpredictable. This is due to our prefrontal cortex, the region that coordinates our thoughts and decides what to do. It's also the area responsible for regulating our feelings. Because humans can entertain many different ideas all at the same time, sometimes we're logical, while at other times we're deeply emotional. I have found at times where I can be very, very emotional about something, but also at the same moment, simultaneously, understand the logic to something. And now, in a fictional sense in Star Trek, this is why Spock's brain is so unique. He's got the flexibility of a human mind combined with the strength of Vulcan emotions. And so his human side might make it more difficult for him to control his Vulcan feelings, but the integration of the two gives him the opportunity to quickly think in very creative ways. As he once said, he is a child of two worlds. And the central psychological experience of Spock's childhood is growing up in a bicultural home. He had a Vulcan father and a human mother. And this shows you something right there. Even in the original series, before all this stuff was greatly defined in detail, you had Sarek, Spock's father, highly logical man, an ambassador, a genius of Vulcan, all these things, marrying a human woman because he loved her. But isn't love an emotion? I would differ with that, and I've done some talks on this, and maybe we'll do this again sometime soon, how love, real love, is not an emotion. Now, this is me speaking. Real love is not an emotion. Love, infatuation is an emotion. Fondness is an emotion. Attraction can be an emotion. But love, when you love somebody or something, you express love. Love is not an emotion. Love is an act of cognitive, conscious will. I choose to love. And now love can include emotion, but say I love my wife. Does that mean I love everything she does and that I fall at every word she says or vice versa? No. Love can disappear the moment you have a big, fat, ugly argument, and that love thing goes way down to the bottom, if it's an emotion. If it's an act of the will, an act of your cognitive expression, then it's something where you latch onto the emotions and you love through the nastiness. You love through the argument. You love through the fight. You might be disenchanted with somebody for a little while. You know, if my wife and I have a big argument, does she want to have sex right away? No, not usually. Because sex is an act of that deeper love, that cognitive action. Sometimes you got to wait for the air to clear a little bit. But does that mean love dissipates or goes away? No, you love through the problems. But that's a whole nother topic. We're talking about Vulcans. So he grew up in this bicultural home. The mother was human, the father's Vulcan. And not only is he a minority on Vulcan, he might be the only human Vulcan child on the whole planet, according to the series. And so the major challenge for bicultural children is to integrate into their two cultures and to integrate the two cultures together within them. We have people right here in real time that are the product of bicultural marriages and bicultural homes. You say that isn't difficult? People who are able to do this, to integrate those things, usually feel very proud about being unique. Others find their cultures to be in conflict with each other constantly, and they feel pressure to choose over the other, one over the other. And psychologists call this the bicultural identity integration construct. You believe all of that's tied into a fictional science fiction character from a planet that probably doesn't exist anywhere? Bicultural identity integration construct. Kids who are able to integrate their cultures become very good at cultural frame switching. They're able to think, act, and feel like a human on Earth and a Vulcan on Vulcan. Or, in another way, kids who are, and I've seen this many times, American kids who are the offspring of, say, here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, we have a huge Hmong, Vietnamese, Asian community. That's the word I'm looking for. And those kids grow up, they speak Vietnamese at home, they eat Vietnamese food, they follow some of the traditions at home. They get out at school, they're totally integrated into, if you will, American culture. And so they live in these two worlds, this bicultural frame switching, and they go back and forth. Kids who can't integrate their cultures don't have this flexibility and have more rigid personalities. This is one of the reasons that I love the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek incarnations. They took Spock to a different level. Spock struggles to figure out his identity. Who am I really? You'd think by his age he would know that, but they show him struggling because he's had to combine what he grew up with now his career, if you will. He had to figure out his identity, and it's beautifully portrayed in the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie. And in a pivotal scene, a group of Vulcan boys are bullying Spock when he was a young boy for being half human. And they push him, hoping it will make him mad and react emotionally, which of course is not a Vulcan thing to do. And since showing strong emotions is a big taboo in Vulcan culture, this situation created a lot of anxiety for Spock, because he was afraid of confirming a stereotype that he can't control his emotions because he's half human. I, of course, would ask the question, why do you have logical kids on Vulcan bullying somebody? Is bullying logical? No, it's not. So there's a lot of mix there, but that goes back to the mythology of the characters, that Vulcans are deeply emotional. They just suppress it. And maybe as kids have a rougher time with that. That's stereotype threat in action. Anytime we worry about fulfilling a stereotype, we usually perform a whole hell of a lot worse. In Spock's case, in these storylines, stereotype threat contributed to him losing his cool and beating the crap out of a kid who really deserved it, by the way. And, of course, he got in trouble for reacting emotionally and beating this other kid in school, just like anybody would. So situations like that caused a lot of identity conflict for Spock. Look closely at the conversation he had with his father and mother after the fight. Spock said, "You suggest that I should be completely Vulcan?" His father, Sarek, says, "Spock, you are fully capable of deciding your own destiny. The question you face is, which path will you choose? This is something only you can decide." Spock says, "Should I choose to complete the Vulcan discipline of Kulinar and purge all emotion?" And of course, the first time we saw Kulinar was where? Star Trek the Motion Picture back in 1979. He said, "I trust you will not feel it reflects judgment on you," Spock says to his father. And his mother, Amanda, says, "Oh, Spock, as always, whatever you choose to be, you will have a proud mother." And in both conversations, we can feel the tension between Spock's Vulcan and human identities. It's clear that Spock was questioning who he is and who he wanted to become. "Should I complete Kulinar?" he asks his father, which was the eschewing of all emotion. Rather than guiding Spock down one path or another, both of his parents encouraged him to make his own decisions. And by allowing him to independently explore his identity, they increased the chances of Spock integrating both cultures. And this type of parenting is a core component in resilience, the psychological factor that keeps kids healthy despite chronic stressors, like constant discrimination for being a green-blooded hobgoblin, as Spock was called by, wasn't that McCoy who called him that? "You green-blooded hobgoblin." I'm pretty sure. But you can also see Spock breaking through. There were times of emotional stress on him. Remember the original series episode, This Side of Paradise, with the plants and the spores that would shoot out. And, of course, Spock turned totally emotional, lost all logic. And Kirk is trying to break him from it because strong emotions would break the effect, the biological effect of the spores. And he gets Spock so enraged that Spock starts beating the shit out of him. And he's going to basically kill Kirk when the influence is finally broken. And Kirk survives the fight, obviously. And so does Spock. And he's a little disappointed that he's lost that emotion when that happens. Spock said along the way, "I choose not to feel." And one of the key changes in the new Star Trek parallel universe with J.J. Abrams is the destruction of Vulcan, which I had a hard time with in the movies. I thought, oh man, that's an awfully big step to take in the storylines. Not only did Zachary Quinto's Spock witness this trauma firsthand, he also lost his mother in the process. And after the terrorist attack, the Spock of the present was overwhelmed by these powerful emotions. In response to his sadness and rage, Spock's primary strategy became numbing himself to his feelings. And after James Kirk ridiculed Spock for feeling nothing, another stereotype thread, Vulcans having no emotions, Spock attacked Kirk. And after almost killing Kirk, Spock gave up his command of the Enterprise because he was emotionally compromised. And so trying to numb these powerful feelings, having uncontrollable emotional outbursts are common experiences after trauma. And look at how, even though this is a fictional science fiction character, look at how the writers really incorporated things that humans really experience, which was one of the beautiful things of the original Star Trek. They called it, and it's so cliche now, the little morality plays that were written into most of the old episodes, the original episodes. This is what we're seeing with this version of Spock. And as the Spock character developed over the years, what becomes problematic is if such patterns continue long after the trauma's passed. And this is exactly what happened to Spock in Star Trek Into Darkness, the movie. The events of that movie take place about a year after the destruction of Vulcan. And the comic prequel, we learned that Spock has insomnia, nightmares about his mom and Vulcan's destruction and bursts of rage. In the film, it's very clear that Spock's trauma is really impacting his relationship with Uhura, which was new in the newer movies. And this exchange captured exactly how Spock has changed. Uhura said, "At the volcano, you didn't give a thought to us. What would it do to you? What would it do to me if you died, Spock? You didn't feel anything. You didn't care." And he said, "Your suggestion that I don't care about dying is incorrect. A sentient being's optimal chance at maximizing their utility is a long and prosperous life. It is true that I chose not to feel anything upon realizing that my own life was ending. As was dying, I joined with his consciousness, as McCoy was dying. I joined with his consciousness and experienced what he felt at the moment of his passing." I'm sorry, not McCoy. There's something that was redacted in here. The anger, the confusion, the loneliness, the fear. I had experienced those things before. Oh, it was Captain Pike he's talking about. And multiplied exponentially on the day my planet was destroyed. Such a feeling is something I choose to never experience again. And you mistake my choice to not feel as a reflection of my not caring. Well, I assure you the truth is precisely the opposite. And by the way, it wasn't Pike's death. I'm trying to remember whose death he's talking about here. It was taken out of the original quote. So the Spock of the present meets all major criteria for PTSD. Re-experiencing traumatic events, avoiding situations, becoming very sensitive to certain feelings. This isn't the resilient child we discussed earlier. This Spock is emotionally stuck, like soldiers and veterans returning from service with PTSD, but this is not the man Spock is destined to be. And then he talks of cowboy diplomacy later in his life, and there's so much more to this. I may have to hit this again tomorrow because you know what? We're at the end of the show right now. I've exhausted the time. We're going to hit this tomorrow. I want to bring this up some more and talk more about these characters for a little fun derivation this week. So thank you for being here, the Intrepid radio program. I'm Scotty Roberts, going out for a 23-hour break, but I'll be back tomorrow. So you sit tight. We'll be right back.
Mm-hmm.